In this video, we will be adding sprites to our game and we will manipulate the sprite in the way that we're flipping it so our sprite is turning in the right direction depending on which way we're moving. So to add sprites to a game, firstly we need to find them. There are plenty of places on the internet to find free sprites, but I often go with opengameart.org. Here you can search for any kind of sprite, music, animations, textures, whatever you can think of you could be needing for your game. And I have found these three sprites, one of a human character I will use as my player. I have found these 2D cave textures. One of these textures I will use for my background. And lastly, I have found this boulder. I will leave links for every asset I use in the description of this video. So in short, we're just going to go to the file section of every page, hit the link. If you downloaded a zip file, extract the files first, and then you can just drag the files into your project tab. Firstly, I will create a new folder. I will call this imported assets. Just to keep my structure clean, I will open up the folder, and in here I will drag the downloaded assets. So now we have our boulder, we have some cave textures, and we have our character. So now let's get to changing the actual sprite. Let's start with our boulder. What we want to do here is to go to our boulder game object in our hierarchy. Here you can see the sprite renderer component and it takes in a sprite. So I will drag this PNG I have here, I'll drag it into the sprite field, and now our boulder has changed. It is a bit more green in the picture. That's because originally we set our color to be green, so we can set our boulder to be any color we'd like. I quite like this blue one actually, and you've maybe noticed this ring around it. This is actually our circle collider. Ideally, we would like the size of the sprite and our collider to be matching. I think the sprite is a bit too small for my case. That's why I'm actually just going to scale the sprite a bit. So I'm going to hit this link button to make sure it scales in all axes at the same time. But the collider of course scales with it. So I'll go to my circle collider component. I will click this button to edit the collider and I can sort of drag this in around the edges so the collider kind of matches with the boulder. The boulder may be a bit small, but that's okay for now. Now that we've changed the sprite of our boulder, let's change the sprite of our player. I will just frame my player object. I will go to my player sprite, and then I will drag this image of the player inside my sprite field. You can see it's a bit reddish as well. That's because of the color we've chosen. But if you want the original color, you just have to set the color to be white. And again, the size of a collider and an actual sprite don't really match. So I will just fix that quickly. And yeah, now I've added my colliders. And you can see it has these two floating bits. I don't really know what they are, but I quite like the human sprite itself. So I will just keep this as is, and I'll leave the collider off the floating parts. If I wanted to, I could edit these bits out. You can do this pretty easily by using any photo editing program. So now that we have our player and our boulder, let's create our background. A very easy way to create a background would be to just create a new square sprite. I'll just take my square sprite and rename it to background. Instead of the original square sprite, I will just add one of these cave textures. And then we could actually just scale this background up a bit and place it correctly. So now in a game, we have the stone wall looking background. I will just say that there are better and more optimal ways to create a background, but for this kind of game, this is all we really need. So now we have the sprites for the boulder, the player, and the background. This is starting to look much better. But the thing that looks kind of weird is that when we walk to the left, our player is walking backwards. And we would like to change that in the player controller script. So we will go to our player controller script because this is where we're moving our player, and we want to manipulate the sprite of the player depending on which direction we're moving. First off, we would like to access some kind of component on our player. If we go to our player game object, what could we possibly edit here to manipulate the sprite? Well, a good guess would be the sprite renderer. So let's try to get that component. We will create a private sprite renderer. Let's just call it sprite renderer. And in the awake method, we will set our sprite renderer to be equal to get component. And what component do we want to get? We want to get a sprite renderer. We could manipulate our sprite in the move method, but I would like to keep a low level of abstraction. So I will create a separate method for this. I will type private void. I could just call the method flip sprite, but I like to be explicit with the naming of my methods to make sure that a reader knows what they actually are doing. So I will call my method flip player sprite. Now, how do we know when we actually want to flip the sprite? So right now, by default, our player is always looking to the right. And when we're moving to the left, we would like the sprite to flip horizontally and make the player look to the left. So when moving, we're actually reading a vector 2. So right now, when I stand still, the value of our movement.x is 0. But when I move to the right, holding down D, it will be positive. so 1, and when I hold down A to move left, it will be negative. It will go to -1. So we can actually use this x value to check which direction we're moving and flipping the sprite accordingly. So we have our movement variable up here, and I will use an if statement saying that if our movement.x is less than 0, then I will access my sprite renderer variable, and here we have a bunch of extension methods, and we actually also have a method which is called flipx, so flips the sprite on the x-axis, which is exactly what we want, and we will set this to true. As you may have noticed, this method now has 0 references and it's grayed out. This is because this method is not called anywhere. We want to call it where we register our input, so therefore this method will be called in our update loop. So up here we will call our flip player sprite method, and now when we run our game and move to the left, our player sprite flips. But we still have a one slight problem. When we are moving to the right again, the player sprite remains flipped. Therefore, we want to head back into our script and make sure that when we're moving to the right, the player sprite is flipped back. And this seems like a really good time to give you the next challenge. So make sure that when we're moving to the right, the player is flipped so it's turning correctly. Pause the video now, give this a good go, and then you can come back to see my solution. So right now we're checking that if the x value is less than 0, so when we're moving to the left on the x-axis, then we want to flip the sprite on the x-axis. So basically now what we need is to do the exact opposite. So we will use the else if statement and say that if the movement at x value is larger than 0, so if we're moving to the right on the x-axis, then the sprite renderer .flipx will be set to false. And now when we run our game and move to the left, our sprite is flipped on the x-axis, and when we're moving to the right, it is flipped back. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please consider leaving a like and a comment, as this helps me out a ton, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching.